I want to try to give some perspective about what you're being asked to do and kind of how all this threads together. So I want you, and I realize this is written out, and it looks like a 4-year-old wrote it, but it takes too long to type all this stuff out. So let's say hypothetically, we're going to ask a question. Is there a difference in third grade STAR tests, reading tests, for students who receive instruction in phonemic awareness versus balanced literacy? So if we're going, really what is behind that is a null hypothesis statement, which means that the third grade STAR reading for phonemic awareness is equal to the third grade STAR balanced literacy. That comes from Module 4. So why does that, or why do we have to have this? This is really the question we're asking, but what we, in essence, what we're saying is these two groups are equal. I want you to think about what I mean by two groups, especially when we get down here. So we don't want to test everybody. We can't really do that, and it doesn't make sense to do that because we don't know for sure what's going to happen. So we're going to take a sample just like this that we talked about from Module 12, and we are going to make a hypothesis about a population. We will never know for sure what is true of the population. So there is a chance that when we do this, we're going to create an experiment where we have a random sample for these two groups. One of those is going to get balanced literacy. Guess which one that is? The other one's going to get what they've always gotten, which there is no treatment at the end. They're the control group. They're still getting the same thing. So it's possible that when we get done with this, there's no difference between the phonemic awareness and the balanced literacy in the actual population. In our sample that comes from our experiment shows that there's no difference between those two things. That's fine, not a problem at all. There is a chance that we say that these two things are equal, which means we've done nothing. Up here, we're saying they're different. We didn't say which one's higher or lower. We're going to be able to figure that out with an experiment, with a t-test. But for right now, all we're saying is that they are not the same. One's higher than the other. Over here, we're saying they are the same. In our sample, after we get done with our experiment, after we run our t-test, what we discover is the scores in the experimental group are equal to the scores in the control group. Okay, that's all right too. Here's what we want to be careful of, and why we're going to do a good job with this, is it is possible for us to say there is no difference between the phonemic awareness and the balanced literacy in our sample, when in fact there is. We've made a type 1 error. And how that occurs can be a lot of things. It may be we don't have a valid or reliable instrument. That's Module 4. It may be our treatment, the internal validity, whatever we did to them, is actually giving us a false reading. That's Module 9. It may be that we did a poor job sampling, what we talked about in Module 6, and therefore we have no external validity for people, place, and time, what we talked about in Module 12. There's lots of reasons why we can make a mistake if we don't do a good job with the things that we have gathered from all these other places. It's possible we say that these two things are equal. It doesn't matter, when in fact there is a difference between those two things. And again, that occurs. This null hypothesis statement we cannot clarify because we've done something wrong in our sampling, we've done something wrong with our treatment, we've done something wrong with our experimentation, how we ran our test, there's something wrong with our instrument, there are issues creating internal validity, or when you don't do a good job sampling, as we learned in Module 6, you have no external validity because it is impossible to say from our sample what is true of the population. We can't ever make that replicate again. So the question was asked, well, how do all these things connect? This is how they connect. There's pieces of information that theoretically you have learned throughout this semester that you need to be able to connect those dots and find out what happened. And there, it takes lots of different things to be able to figure out this null hypothesis. The other thing is, how do we know we did something significant? So if we want to know if we did something significant, there are tests, the tests that we learned about in Module 7, that are the right things to do versus the wrong things to do. So in this example, we wanted to know if we made a difference beginning to end within those two groups, respectively. So in that case, that's a paired t-test, a dependent sample t-test. We're comparing one thing to itself. If we want to compare this group to this group at the end, or we want to compare this group to this group at the beginning, those are two unpaired groups. Those are independent t-tests. If we wanted to measure, if we weren't measuring star rating, if we were measuring attitudes towards reading with a Likert scale, that's a different group. We're comparing the two groups, my experimental group and control group, with an ordinal scale. That's a Mann-Whitney. If it is comparing beginning to end, that's a Wilcoxon. With the Solomon group, which probably is not actually realistic to be able to do that, now you've got multiple groups. And we learned about the Solomon example in Module 12. But that is tested through an ANOVA, which comes from Module 7. So all this stuff is connected to each other. There are different pieces that you have to apply to be able to find out the answer to this question you want to know. And there's some things that we work through this class that don't show up on here. But this is trying to get you to understand, when you look at what you're being required to do, what are the pieces that you need to take in consideration?